Okay, good afternoon, students. I'm sitting outside waiting for Deborah, who's at piano lessons in Provo today, and so I thought this would be a good time to record my first video. It's a Noodlin with Nesha on video. So I'm just going to imagine that we're at the studio, we're sitting in a circle having a discussion. I was chatting for a minute with a class last week, and they were talking about the fireside and kind of its message and the message of their dance. And one of them was like, "You should record a podcast." And I've been thinking about how I want to communicate with you guys this year, because the most important thing to me is that the fireside is transformational for you as the students, and that so that you really understand what it is you're communicating through movement to the audience who comes to see it. And that just was like a great idea for a way that I can share some things with you, help you understand what it is that we're going to presenting, help you connect with the message. And anyway, so I'm kind of excited about it, and a little uncomfortable. Like, this video selfies is not really my thing, but like I said, I'll just imagine we're at the studio and I'm just talking and having a conversation. But the fireside theme this year is called The Source, and it comes from a concept that I was taught about 7 years ago now, at a time in my life when I was really exhausted and worn out, and I did this mentorship from a woman, her name's Stacy Sadler, and she was actually in the fireside, I don't know, around that time, 6 or 7 years ago. And it just really was so eye-opening to me, some of these concepts that we're going to talk about, and it really shifted my perspective and helped me become such a healthier person, a lot more self-aware. And in April, I had Becky Muller, her girls take down at the Salem studio. Her girls have been there a long time, and I didn't know her very well, but I could tell after every fireside, we'd have this moment, when she would thank me for the message, and I could just tell she really understood. We just kind of had this unspoken connection, even though I didn't know her very well. And she asked me after the fireside in January if we could get together sometime. She wanted to share something with me, and in April she came over, and she had a manuscript of a book that she has written from her life experiences, and asked if I would read it, give her feedback. And that was just such a beautiful experience. Her book came at a time in my life that I really needed it, and it was so interesting because we kind of realized that our life experiences the last 7 years, we've had a lot of, even just throughout their lives, like, we've had kind of parallel experiences, and we've been learning the same things. So it was really wonderful to read her experience, helped me to understand my experience more. And so some of the things I'm going to share are from her book, which I really hope gets published, because I think it will bless a lot of lives. So the fireside this year is different. In the past, we've featured a lot of stories and of people, and around like an inspiring concept. And my hope is this year that you and the people who come and watch it, it's will really cause them to look inward and look at themselves in maybe a different way than they have before. So, and I was really grateful. Becky actually wrote the fireside this year, and I've never had anyone write it before, but it's been really fun collaborating with her. And it's such a beautiful and important message. So, what I've come to realize is, I think my whole life I felt more like a performer. Maybe being in the performing arts, or I don't know, but I always felt like what mattered is my actions, what I was doing, what I was accomplishing. That was kind of my identity, and I felt like a performer in everyday life, and felt like I needed to earn God's approval and other people's approval, and that I was a good person. And I think the big thing that I've really come to understand the last few years is that our inner world, like the inside of us, our way of being, like we learned from Arbinger last year, is the final frontier. And that is where it's at, is what's happening inside of us. And that your way of being, your inner state, has the greatest impact on how you feel about yourself, on your capacity to love other people, on the peace that you have in your life, your effectiveness, your well-being, and your overall health. It has a lot more to do with what's in here. Your actions, like if you picture an iceberg sitting in the ocean, and sometimes you can only see like the tip of this iceberg poking out of the ocean, and that's our actions. That's what people can see and observe. But underneath, there's this massive piece of ice, and that's us too. Like what people don't see, what's not visible, what's inside of us are our thoughts and our feelings, like our paradigms, the way that we view the world, our fears, our insecurities, our belief systems. And those are the things that really matter and really need our attention. So I hope as we prepare for the fireside and we explore these ideas and these concepts that you will take time to really go inside yourself and explore. It is the hardest work you will ever do, is inside of yourself. It's harder than what you do in the dance classroom, as hard as that is. It's what we do inside of ourselves. So the concept that was introduced to me that we're exploring in the fireside is one way to look at it, or a title of it, is source versus specialness. Okay. So I'm just going to introduce it a little bit today. So source means everyone on the planet, every human being, comes from a divine source. And this divine source is full of light and of love, and every individual has equal importance and worth, and your worth and your importance, your mattering, it's a divine inheritance that comes just from your creation. It's not something you have to earn. And important thing is, no human being is worth more than another. Like, we're all equally important because we all came from that same source. And all of our creation was divine. Like, I just really have this belief that God does not make mistakes. So the way that we are created, the attributes, the way we look, everything about us, it's not a mistake. It's here for a reason, and we have a purpose for being here. And we are all connected because we all come from the same place. And that divine source of love and of light is equally available to everyone on the planet. Okay, so that's source. And when you're close to your source, you are at your greatest power. And I don't mean like power over people, but I mean like power over self and power of understanding and light. That's when you are your highest self, like the truest version of yourself. But what happens is, very early in life, we develop this deep fear that unconsciously drives all of our other fears. And it comes as we realize that we have been cut off. We've been separated from that source of light and of love. And we spend a lot of our lives trying to fill up that hole that comes from the separation by trying to create specialness, by trying to differentiate ourselves from others and prove that we are special, that we matter, that we're important. And this is the birthplace of our ego. And I want you to help you understand a little bit about what ego is, and to start to develop some awareness about around the concept for yourself, like the way your ego works with you. So the ego is different than what I grew up thinking. I mean, when I thought ego, I thought someone who really thinks a lot of themselves, is really puffed up and self-aggrandized. And in Eastern culture, the concept of ego is really different. Ego, in the way that we're talking about it, it's characterized by a sense of lack, of fear, of uneasiness, and just this persistent feeling that you're not enough and that you don't have enough. And the ego really tries desperately to avoid uncertainty by controlling everything. It doesn't like uncertainty. It doesn't like discomfort. So that's where a lot of like unhealthy coping strategies come in, because it can't handle it needs comfort and ease. It just fears hard things. And it really despises vulnerability by avoiding and hiding like our character defects with perfectionism, right? Feeling that we always have to be perfect. And having an ego does not make you bad, because everybody has one. It's just an inherent part of being a human. Okay. So, if you can, but for me, learning to recognize and understand my ego has been life-changing, just life-changing. So everyone's ego is going to affect them differently depending on your personality, like the traits that you came to earth with, but also your life experiences, past trauma that you've had in your life. And I'm going to share some of like the common ways the ego is manifested for people, but I'm also going to share some personal experiences to illustrate my learning about my ego, but you may not relate to all of them because your personality is way different than mine, so the ego manifests itself differently depending on who you are and your life story. So, but I really believe that awareness, just an awareness of it, is the first step. Okay. So ego is a product of your mind's stories. It clings to stories that our minds make up about who we are and why we do or do not have value. So you have an experience that makes you feel unimportant. I don't have value. You have an experience, you win something, you get something you want, and then for a moment you feel like you have value. So it's always making up these stories. It can even be like, I achieved this, I am successful, that's my story, or this really hard thing happened to me, therefore I am a victim. And the ego it's defined by story. It's defined by what happens to us. And as we go through life and we have all of these experiences that build on each other, we unconsciously make meanings from each experience until we have created just this fortress of belief systems that affect the way we see everything. Okay. And if we allow our ego, if our ego is the lens through which we see the world and see our lives, and that's what's steering us, then we're being led by a really faulty compass. For me, when I became aware of ego, before I was aware of it, I always lived, I don't know, I just felt this like anxious energy, and had this kind of uneasy, discontent state, and pretty much constantly. And I just thought that was normal. I thought this was normal. I felt this constant subconscious need to prove that I was good enough and that my efforts were acceptable, and had this belief that if I was perfect enough and I did everything right and I worked hard enough, that everybody would like me and no one would ever be upset with me. No one would be disappointed with me. Okay. And I felt like my worthiness as a person, like I had to constantly be earning it. And that depended on what I accomplished and how well I accomplished it. So that was my ego. Yours might be totally different, but that's how it played out for me. Like sometimes I felt like I didn't even exist if it got to this point where I wasn't externally manifesting something or producing something that could be, validated. And I don't know, for you, it might be, I think sometimes people who've had a lot of praise for like what they look like, your identity can be your appearance. Like that's your ego identity. Or, I know that I even have someone that I know that she was always really petite growing up and small. And she always got comments like, you're so small. Like, she was short and she was just really tiny and you're so tiny. And she told me later, as she hit about 14, that that was her identity. That's how she felt special. And she developed an eating disorder because she needed control of that identity, that she was small, that she was petite. She needed to have that validation. Okay. I also know someone who had a lot of health challenges, and she got a lot of validation because of the way she handled suffering. And she told me once that her identity, like, she was recognizing that if she wasn't suffering and being validated for suffering because that had become her identity, that she didn't feel special. So it's, it's really different. It's just, you can start to think about that. What makes me feel like I matter? What makes me feel like I'm important and special? And that's really important that you determine that for yourself. Like, what's your story and how is that affecting the way that you see everything? Okay. So for me, I spent a lot of my energy mentally, emotionally, and physically trying to ensure that I lived up to the expectations that I felt like God and other people had for me. And that was the lens that I saw the world through. So if someone was upset or disappointed with me, or I didn't meet their expectation, then my ego would say, oh, if you just seen this coming, if you had just done this or done that, or worked a little harder here, then you wouldn't be affecting, this person would not have negative feelings towards you. And the problem was that all of that hustling and that perfecting of myself was validated and reinforced because I did achieve a lot in my life, and I did do a lot of things that gave, a pat on the back by other people. And so I just really felt like all of that striving, that unhealthy striving, was just me trying to be a good person, to be like a hard worker, to try and do the right things. I didn't see what was unhealthy about it and what was exhausting and really depleting about the way I functioned in the world. Because to me, that's just what a good person did. But my state of being, like everything under the iceberg, even if my actions were good, everything under the iceberg had a lot of problems, a lot of issues in, why I did things. And it was very unhealthy and very ego-based. So Becky turned me on to this book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And in that book, he says, you get your sense of who you are from things that ultimately have nothing to do with who you are. Your social role, are you popular at school? Do people like you? Your possessions, your external appearance, your successes and failures, your belief systems, and so on. This false mind-made self, the ego, feels vulnerable, insecure, and is always seeking new things to identify with to give it a feeling that it exists. That kind of goes back to me. Like, I didn't exist if my ego wasn't being fed by my accomplishments. But nothing is ever enough to give it lasting fulfillment. Its fear remains, its sense of lack and neediness remains. And that was really true for me. Like, my senior year of high school, I got an academic scholarship to BYU. So I was a good student. I was president of my senior class, president of the National Honor Society, president of peer counseling. I won my local junior miss program. I gave a senior piano and vocal recital. I danced a ton, and on the outside it was like, whoa, but on the inside I was pretty much a hot mess. So, because I was pushing myself too hard, I wasn't healthy. And I was doing it because I was never satisfied. I had to accomplish the next thing in order for my ego to feel like I was okay. Okay. And then Becky, in her book, she says the ego is always creating a story for why we are worth something, always searching and grasping for more love, more money, more approval, more recognition, more attention. It is always looking and never finding, because ultimately it is looking in places that can never satisfy. And the feelings that the words I would use to describe it is just this discontent and this unease that just permeates your everyday life. It's just kind of your normal state. So ego tries to create specialness by differentiating us from other people. Like, the more different, the more special, the better. That's what the ego likes. Okay. So the ego really likes winners and losers, and it likes the most and the least and the worst and the greatest. And it really lives in comparison. So if I'm good at something, then that must mean that someone else is not in order for me to be good. And if you, anytime you have feelings of, it's not just superiority, like better than, but anytime you're also feeling less than, or you're feeling inadequate, that all comes from ego. Those feelings of inadequacy are really powerful, and that comes from your ego. Anytime you're judging another person or comparing, that's your ego. Okay. And the problem is when you become aware of this, you start to realize like, oh, my ego is competing with all the other egos that are around me. And we're all just fighting up against each other. Okay. When people are not aware and they live in that space, it's just, we all play this game on and on and on. And we trigger each other's egos constantly. Okay. Ego. Well, this is a funny little example, funny story from my life that I think illustrates the ego and differentiating yourself. So when I was a child, when I was 9, I auditioned for this community play of Annie, and it was a really big deal in my community growing up, these plays, and I got a lead role. It's the first time. I didn't even really know I could sing, but apparently I could, and I had this big voice. And after that, after being in that play, you know, like the newspaper reviewed me and stuff, and I got asked to sing at the Festival of Trees and do a full program, and my church community, like, I started to get asked to perform all the time. And over those next couple of years, my identity, like my specialness was, I'm a good singer. Well, that's my identity. That's who I am. And it gave me a sense of mattering and of specialness. And I remember, this is really funny and embarrassing, but being about 11 or 12 and going to church, and on the program, it said that some girl was singing who I didn't know. She was a relative of somebody who was visiting. And I remember having this like sinking feeling of, what if she's good? What if she's better than me? But I'm the good singer, you know? So if she's good, then that threatens my identity. Okay. So I think that's a really good illustration though of how that ego and that sense of specialness works. Ego also loves, well, and I must say, like, now without ego, because I don't have any ego about singing, I hardly ever perform anymore. Kind of out of that phase of my life, but I feel really grateful for the gift of music. I feel grateful that I can combine my voice with others, you know, to share good messages. But I do not even think about myself as a good singer. It's just not even a part of my identity, you know, which is just it actually allows me to enjoy music and love it in a much more real and authentic way. So, ego also loves to identify itself with something, like with groups. So it's very like us versus them mentality. You know, we're right, you're wrong. And I'm in this group here and you guys are over there. So all the little cliques and stuff, that's all ego. And it builds a false sense of connection and security because in that us them mentality, but it's not real connection. And my family, like, we have talked about this concept of specialness a lot. So when one of us is starting to talk in ego, we kind of call each other out. It's kind of become this family joke, and we'll just look at the person and say, you're feeling pretty special right now, aren't you? You know, and it's just a way of helping us not go to that place of identifying with our accomplishments or what we do. Okay. Now, the sad thing about all of this is all of our ego thoughts and our efforts to feel special, they really have the opposite effect. Because the more we try and feel special, the more we separate ourselves from source, and the more we separate ourselves from other people. And being close to your source and being close to other people, like genuinely, really close, those are the only things that fill that fear, that take it away, that help you to really know how much you matter and how important everybody is. And by taking away, you know, we take ourselves away from that source of light and love when we seek after mattering in all of this ego stuff that doesn't It doesn't matter. It never satisfies. It's just like a craving that can never be filled. So that's a little bit about the ego. And I have other stories and stuff and things that I want to share, but want to end a little bit with talking about like, well, what's the opposite of ego then? Like, what's the state that we are striving for? And I like to think of it, for me, when I think of it as my higher self. And I can feel it. Like I deal with my ego every day. Everybody does. But when I'm in a place of just awareness and connection to my higher power, this is what it feels like. There is a place in myself. It is a space in me that is so connected to the divine, so full of light and truth that no one else can touch it or affect it. It's my higher self. She travels with me everywhere and can be in a space with anyone or in any situation. She views others as the being of light they truly are, with love, openness, and acceptance. She is not threatened by the light of others, but embraces others' strengths and acknowledges that all goodness comes from Source. She shares and gives freely without regard for how it's received. She is not afraid to be seen completely because she understands that her imperfections and pain are the pathway to learning and growth. There is no need to hide behind a facade of perfection. Peace is her natural state, and in this place, I find my true power. This is where everything is clear. When my connection to my divine source is unclouded by ego, I find peace. This is the essence of who I am, the divine that can see the divine in everyone around me. So my challenge for this week for my dancers is just to start practicing ego awareness. Pay more attention to your inner world. Don't live with distraction and constantly be in your phone, or, when you're feeling anxious, go inside and look at it. Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? If you're feeling like you're not enough, well, where's that coming from? And write it down and process it and see what you discover about yourself that lies beneath the tip of that iceberg. Okay. I promise you that if you go inside, you will find yourself, like your true self, and you will find God. And if you guys want, I would love this to be an exchange, so you can post comments or questions and in the comment section of the YouTube, or you can email me at lifehouseacademy.com if something's too personal, and we can, if you have a question or something. And I'll be posting videos, I don't know, as something comes up to me, in preparation for the fireside. But I love you all, and I'm excited to do this show together. Thanks. Bye.